that is designed around the role of content knowledge and pedagogical content knowledge. And it's kind of funny, I was watching Lee last night, and he sort of said, you know, we sort of have this Talmudic or biblical sort of way of interpretation, and that actually describes how we interpret Shulman's work. And I know Shulman is not consistent, and his colleagues are not completely consistent in their work, but we've always, in our own work, sort of referenced this 1986 educational researcher article in which he does separate out content knowledge, refers to the organization of knowledge in the mind of the teacher from pedagogical content knowledge, which goes beyond that content knowledge to get at the best kinds of representations, the student misconceptions that are going to come up, ways in which you can make disciplinary explanations accessible to kids. And then he also had a third category, which is curricular knowledge, which is, just the teachers have the knowledge of the tools that are available to them, and are they able to use those tools in smart ways. So, and we have this egg that we use all the time in research, where we separate subject matter knowledge from pedagogical content knowledge. So what we see Shulman is talking about is this sort of what we call knowledge of students and content, and knowledge of content and teaching. So under the first one, it would be knowledge of the mistakes kids make, or what questions to ask kids to elicit, or you see in classrooms, teachers will do preventative work on student mistakes, and they'll say, like, I know a bunch of you guys are going to go do this kind of thing. Actually, that would fall under content knowledge and teaching, which is sort of the instructional moves that teachers make, given the situation that's in their classroom. And we separate that from common content knowledge, which is simply knowledge of the curriculum that is being taught, like can teachers in our case, multiply with decimals, and specialized content knowledge, which we argue is content knowledge is pure content knowledge, but it's specific to the work of teaching. So the example that we often give is from one of the items that's on our assessment. It asks, if you're simplifying a fraction like 4/8, you divide 4/8 by 4/4, right? And the question is, everybody in our sample usually knows how to simplify a fraction, but in our samples, when you ask teachers to say why that doesn't change the value of the initial fraction, there's some differences of opinion in our large-scale samples. The answer is, of course, you're dividing by 1. 4/4 is 1, and anytime you divide by 1, you're not changing the value of a number. So that is an example of the specialized content knowledge that if you watch a lot of instruction, you see some teachers deploying that very effectively in their classroom, and you see other teachers who don't seem to have that kind of knowledge and are not able to sort of bring that disciplinary grounding to kids as they're teaching. So anyway, that's our egg. So we've always placed content knowledge with, and we call this actually, by the way, mathematical knowledge for teaching. Content knowledge has always been a part. And we've become, or we are curious about testing the relationship between MKT and what we would call upper level content knowledge. So a lot of certification assessments in the US ask teachers, elementary school teachers, middle school teachers to solve either high school or college level problems. And so one of the things that we think about a lot is that appropriate as a certification bar for teachers, or should we be asking them to solve different kinds of problems? So, okay. So I actually went through, and so this is more broadly looking through all of the papers that were kind of turned in for the conference, and it actually looked like an even split between those that include subject matter knowledge inside of PCK, and then those who would not. They included outside, or it's considered to be separate. Some of the papers talked about a transformation of subject matter knowledge into PCK, which I think is one way to think about the relationship between the two. And then actually, as a side note, and I think we're going to address this tomorrow, there's some split over whether teachers' orientations are included. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's sort of where this group is. So theoretically, there should be a good discussion if that is the kind of goal, is to work out whether it's inside or outside. It seems like that's something that people have some different views of. Okay. So then, now here's the, how many more minutes do I have? 5, okay. So here's the kind of piece that is more, now I've done my duty, I can actually talk about what I'm talking about. So I'm actually really, this slide originally said, why should we care, convinced me that arguing about whether content knowledge is inside or outside of PCK is a useful exercise. I can tell you sort of my view on this. which is that I think that I tend to be more of a purist and think that narrow constructs are much more useful than very broad constructs. So we should not ever think that there's one golden bullet that will explain all of teacher competency in the classroom. Teachers bring many diverse sets of resources, attitudes, orientations, and I don't feel the need to wrap them all into PCK. I like to say, there's PCK, there's subject matter knowledge, there's a set of orientations teachers have to the discipline and to the work. There's also things that are not in the teacher's mind. There are curriculum materials that the teacher's working with. There's kids that the teacher's working with. And those are things that, for me, when I think about if you're trying to predict student outcomes, you'd want to instrument all of those and be very clear that those are separate entities in my mind. So perhaps people disagree with me, but that's kind of where I've come down in this one. I also would sort of urge people to take up Shulman's charge to focus on knowledge in action and think about what this would mean. Especially in the sense that we have, when we look at our distributions of teachers and we look at their mathematical knowledge for teaching, so imagine an array of mathematical knowledge for teaching from teachers who have very little of it to teachers who have a whole lot of it. So the people in the tails, those teachers in the tails, really, their performance in the classroom really is very close to what you would predict. So people who have a lot of MKT do really well in classrooms. People with really poor MKT do really poorly in classrooms, but the teachers in the middle are all over the place. Some of them do really well in classrooms, some of them do really poorly when you watch their mathematics teaching. And so thinking about sort of the translational process and what goes into that translational process above and beyond maybe even knowledge. So clearly there's something to do with curriculum materials, there's something to do with the kids in the classroom, maybe there's other pieces that we're missing in there. And that for me is one of the sort of mysteries of, or the pieces that I think we have left to kind of unpack. Finally, I wanted to end with a bulletin from the front. So it's kind of my work actually nowadays, I hang out with policymakers in the US, and so I know this is a very international audience. I'll try to provide a little context for this. So I hang out with people that are designing teacher evaluation systems, and that's the work that the Mark Center does. And what's going on in the US is there's a move toward evaluating teachers in many, many states. I think it's 13, 18 states now, have adopted evaluation plans that are now going to be evaluating teachers based on their kids' test scores and gains in their kids' test scores. And second, generic observation instruments, Framework for Teaching, Marzano. The curriculum and instruction people in districts have been thrown out the window, thrown under the bus, whatever analogy you want to use here. They are not involved in these efforts to evaluate teaching. And in fact, some of the efforts to evaluate teaching are at odds with what those curriculum and instruction people have been doing for the last 20 years to improve instruction in their districts. Okay, so this is a serious problem. And one of the issues is that teachers now, instead of having incentives to deepen their pedagogical content knowledge or improve their content-specific teaching, have incentives to do a whole separate set of things. So if you look at any of these evaluation rubrics, content knowledge is one item out of 10 items, 20 items, 50 items. You can do well on these observational rubrics simply by having kids under control in the classroom, by doing some things that are on the evaluation rubric, not necessarily demonstrating expertise in teaching subject matter content. And so this is, I think, an all hands on deck kind of situation. And this is where I'm hoping my research goes in the next 10 years, and I'm hoping that as we mature as a field, we start to look at the interaction between these policy incentives, these policies that are going to change the nature of teaching dramatically, and the ways in which we've sort of conceptualized what teachers know and should be doing in classrooms.